Good morning, everyone. It's Thursday, the 24th of September, and it's just after 10:30 a.m. You're all very, very welcome. My name is Mark Harris. I'm your moderator for today's webinar, which is all around the impact of lost talent in a changing business travel landscape. And this is the fifth in the series of webinars, part of our Engage series, and they're brought to you by Travel Intelligence Network in association with International Hospitality Media. We'd like to thank the sponsors for Engage, the Collective, the Residents, Blue Orchid Hotels, and CAP Worldwide Serviced Apartments. Now, this series of webinars is part of a lead-up to Engage, which is a year one event, and this is a travel buyer forum that's been devised by buyers for focusing very much on the accommodation and urban living innovators. Now, it's currently scheduled to take place on Wednesday, the 25th of November. Obviously, in the light of recent government announcements, we're still waiting for confirmation on that, but please do put the date in your diaries, and you can find in the chat box a no-cost invitation to this event. As I said, these webinars are a collaboration between International Hospitality Media and Travel Intelligence Network. That's my business. What we are about is providing unique content for travel, hospitality, and meeting providers. The projects we are very best known for include 8 editions of the Global Service Department's Industry Report, 6 editions of the Meetings Industry Report, at the last count over 50 white papers, and we're also heavily involved with IHM on the Service Apartment Awards. The Engage session is part of a bigger event, Urban Living Festival, and the Engage is in fact the corporate travel track for that. Please put that date though in your diaries. As I said before, we are still awaiting the confirmation and clarification. We hope to go ahead with that, and we do believe it's important that in these challenging times that we get a face-to-face event away for everyone in our sector. So let's move now to the rules of engagement for this webinar. The information you require is on your screen. A couple of key points. In the background is my co-host Justin. He's here to make sure that this all doesn't keel over. The key point on this webinar is in and around questions. And on most webinars, you normally get the chance to ask your questions at the end. We like to do things slightly differently. If you want to ask a question at any point throughout the session, please do so. And you can use the chat function or alternatively email your questions. They'll come up on my screen, and I'll then put your questions as soon as I can to our panel of speakers today. So please don't wait till the end. Get your questions in as we go, and let's get as much interaction as possible. Time now to welcome the panelists who have given up their time on our session today, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, starting with Clare French.
Good morning, everybody. So I, as Mark says, Clare French. I previously worked for AETHOS Budget Group. I worked for them for 30 years until my role was sadly made redundant at the end of March.
Thank you, Clare. And now I'd like to ask Thomas, please. You could introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Glad to be able to join this panel. So basically, I'm Thomas Mielke, co-founder and managing director of AETHOS Consulting Group. We're essentially a human capital advisory and executive search firm, very much focused and specialized on the hospitality, travel, and real estate sectors. We're small, but operate globally. We tend to work with investors who could come from private equity, institutional backgrounds, or family offices. But we also work with operators and travel intermediaries. And we tend to work first and foremost in assisting them with recruitment assignments at senior corporate level, really across all the functions. But we also handle on their behalf leadership assessments, coaching assignments, and compensation consulting. And that's basically me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Thomas. And Dave, please.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Dave Clare. I'm the Managing Director of the Business Travel Network, my little company I set up just over a year ago. I've been involved in the travel industry for about 25 years now and corporate travel for about 20 years. And it's an industry I love. It's the people in the industry that I love so much. And more recently, I've been doing a role with the Business Travel Association, helping the team there with the BTA Cares programme.
Thank you, Dave. Welcome to all our panellists. And my job this, over the next 55 minutes is to keep the conversation going. And as it says there, I'm Mark Harris, Director of Travel Intelligence Network. So welcome to all our speakers. Let's now get into our session. And today, about the impact of lost talent. And there's an awful lot of it, a scary amount, in fact. This session, ladies and gentlemen, is all about people. It's totally about people. And we're going to look at a number of issues in the course of the next hour. We're going to look at the impact of the recent problems on the employee. We're going to ask whether the focus on culling sales and marketing jobs is short-sighted. We're going to look at how shrinking workforces could be impacting innovation, customer service and delivery. We're going to ask how long it's going to take employers to plug the knowledge gaps. We're also going to then take a little look into the future at whether that's going to see more startups, more consultants, and ask whether there's room for everyone. And then we're going to lead up to looking at what the opportunities are for newly redundant corporate travel professionals and where you can find them. So those are our main topics for the next hour or so. A little bit of context. I'm sure all of these things will be known to most of the people on this call, but when you consider that we have predictions from AETHOS that anywhere up to 20% of UK travel sector jobs could be lost as a direct result of COVID, the global business travel market losing a huge amount of revenue in 2020, and most recently, the estimate that anywhere up to half of business travel jobs could be at risk due to quarantine. Very worrying times. So before we go on to open up with our first questions, we're going to ask you a question. Are you worried about your future in business travel? We're going to ask you to take part in our poll now. Is there anyone who answers yes or no? So we're going to ask you please all to register your vote. Are you worried about your future in business travel? It'll take us a little while to work through the answers. This goes through one of the government departments, so don't worry. If you don't like the answer, there'll be another one around in about an hour's time. But we'll share the results of that poll with you in the course of this webinar. So make sure you register your votes. So then, let's talk about the impact of lost talent. The first question is this: how does it actually affect the individual? Clare French, what is the impact of losing your job as a result of COVID been on you?
Yes, so as I said in the introduction, I was made redundant back in March. I'd been with the company for just short of 30 years. And whilst having seen what was happening even in those early stages with COVID, it wasn't a complete out of the blue. There was an element of an expectation of it coming, but it was still hard. It is hard. There is a grieving process that you go through. You know, I lost that whole talking to my colleagues, talking to my customers, whether it be on email, whether it be face-to-face visits, whether it be over the phone. You lose all of that connection almost overnight. My role was a situation that I was told mid-March, and by the end of the month, so it's a very quick process for me, and I'd also had holiday in that time. So actually coming to terms with it was quite difficult. And whilst I love my husband to bits, I've got to say that in case he's listening, one of the challenges of working from home, you know, I wasn't used to being with him 24/7. It was just something I wasn't used to. And you know, we're a very tactile industry. So to lose all of that, it was a shock, and it was something that you really do have to take time to come to terms with it. You also go through that whole, why me? Why was it me? What have I done? And, you know, COVID helped that in some respects, because you knew there was an outside influence that you had no control over. So yeah, it is hard, but I would, keep in contact with people. I set up a number of Zoom calls with ex-colleagues, just to still keep in contact and have that ability to talk to people and still be with people. So that kind of is my experience.
So when it comes to Dave, Clare now, so
Yeah.
Dave, is Clare's story resonant with others that you speak to in the industry? Is that a common experience?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think the whole thing is, as Claire said, there is a grieving process. And many people that we speak to and I talk to, it's a shock because of what's happened, and you generally feel that you're doing a great job. And as once again, as Claire said, it's not your own fault. These are outside impacts which are impacting on people. But we are an incredibly tactile industry, and when this first happened, I set up some groups, chatting to people, and people miss the human interaction. We are people who love to cuddle each other and see each other and do this sort of stuff, and also losing your job and they're being furloughed and having no actual interaction with people had a massive effect on people. And I'm afraid to say you see more and more of it, and we get more and more people coming onto the calls who are going through that grieving process, are lost, are not having the interaction, and it's a massive thing for people, absolutely massive. And yeah, it's
Dave,
quite frightening.
Dave, sorry, could you just share with other people on the call just a little bit of insight into the BTA Care program that I know you're involved with?
Yeah, so it's something that we came up with a couple of months ago, and we realised this was going to get worse before it got better. And the whole idea was to actually offer help to people who were, with respect, like Claire, who may be redundant, who were furloughed or under consultancy. So we've tried to come up with a range of ideas, A, to keep the engagement going, but B, to generally help people. And I think we went through a phase of when the whole pandemic was at its height. We did a lot of well-being and such like, and I think that got done quite a lot. And we're actually now trying to do is pass on help and skills. So we've done transferable skills, helping people with CV writing, helping people with updating their LinkedIn profiles, and talking to people actually who have unfortunately lost their jobs. So we do a good to talk session where we get people to come in and just talk, and and a couple of those sessions without breaking any confidence. We've had people who literally last week lost their job, and they're looking at us on the screen going, I don't know, I've just finished crying. I've just stopped crying. It's been a week of me in tears, the shock. I'm now starting to settle down and think, actually, right, how do I take this further? So sadly, we've had massive demand on the BTA Cares program, and I think it's only going to get worse over the coming months. So we've decided we're going to continue it probably through October and possibly even November. But it's just something that we're trying to do to give people somewhere to come and talk, listen and learn.
I'm going to come to Thomas in just a minute on a slightly different topic, but first I'm going to come back to you, Claire. So you found yourself in this position, and obviously we've heard from Dave some of the resources that are out there, but who have you been able to turn to, and what is your plan going forward?
When it first hit, I did take a couple of months. I was in a position where I could take a couple of months to take a step back and enjoy the summer that we had back in April and May. Then I had to start from scratch. I had to start with a CV that supported what I'd done, and to really look at how your CV should look. So I was very much on LinkedIn. I joined a number of the support networks that are on LinkedIn. I've joined the BTA Cares webinars as well, and that support to help you to write your CVs, to update your LinkedIn profiles, to think about your cover letters, and to really think about what you have that is not just travel related. And that's something that I really had to go through, because when I first wrote my CV, even back in March when COVID was hitting quite badly, it was still a travel related CV, because I very much hoped that things would change far quicker than they are, and they have done. So yeah, I really had to go back and look at what I had, put that into words, and then be able to look at the supports that is out there, and there is a lot of support out there, and people are more than willing to review your CV, give you honest feedback, and to support through the whole process.
So I'm going to bring Thomas in now. So Thomas, you've heard there particularly first-hand evidence from Clare. What sort of shape, you're in the executive talent placing business, what sort of shape is the talent in when it comes to you? Is that talent ready for its next opportunity, or have you effectively almost got to work with them to, because the situation they're finding themselves in is quite often unexpected? What's your take on this, please, Thomas?
Yeah, look, I think certainly what Claire and Dave have been sharing resonates with me, and I'm having lots of similar conversations day in and day out with a broad number of individuals, essentially really across the different functions and sub-segments of the industry. I think right now it's just mentally a very challenging and difficult times for a lot of senior executives. I think there's a lot of pressure on them. I think to some extent certain individuals feel lost. So that's tricky. There are two probably aspects I would probably try to highlight. One is it's really important, however difficult it may be, but it's got to be important for the individuals to stay optimistic, to have the long-term view in mind, because at some point things will change. And if oneself finds oneself in a difficult mental spot, it's just going to impede, potentially the process of applying for different opportunities. One is not necessarily in the right mindset to also explore and evaluate the right opportunities. So we work a lot with individuals to go through that process. But on the flip side, we actually also work a lot with client organizations. So with big corporate organizations, but also with SMEs and startups, to help them basically improve the entire redundancy process. Because ultimately, I think what's key, and we've heard that already from Claire, for example, and also from Dave, is communication and support. And I think organizations, most of them didn't want to make people redundant. I'd say 95% of them. And they've really tried their best to postpone the inevitable, if you'd like. What's important is how they went about doing the redundancy process and how they're engaging and supporting those individuals. And there are a number of different ways. Dave, obviously, you've mentioned the support network that you've set up, but it's also the responsibility from the client organizations. So they're going to, the successful ones have put in place training programs. They've put in place, for example, referral programs, potentially providing access also to, call it an alumni network, where one can sort of discuss potential opportunities, different career paths. Certainly, a lot of the organizations that we've been dealing with have put in place, I don't want to call it a support hotline, but basically, facilities which provide mental support, because that's really the key issue right now. And it's communication, because ultimately, I think companies also know that at some point, ideally, they may want to hire some of these people back. So to stay engaged and to continue supporting them is a good way to keep them basically as good levers, if you'd like.
I'm going to bring Dave in now, because I think there's a point you wanted to come back, particularly I think on what Claire was saying previously.
Yeah, the one thing that we heard from a lot of people with respect to Claire, they've been in their industry or their roles for quite some time. The whole thing of writing a CV was totally alien to them. I mean, the way it's all changed now, and what we're hearing from people is a lot of CVs now, you submit them, they're checked by a computer first. They're not actually read by individuals. The computer checks it, and if it picks out certain words, you'll get through. If it doesn't like these words, it won't get through. And I think for a lot of people, it was, caught in the headlights, the fact that, right, where do I start? How do I write a CV? We all did it when we were left school. I had a situation about probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I had a revisit of my CV. Thankfully, I didn't need it, but I think that's a massive thing for people. It's not just actually losing your role, it's actually where do I begin? And I think the CV thing was massive because we hadn't done it for so long.
Actually, I've got a question here that's come from Roger Peters, and it's for Thomas. I'll read the question, Thomas, and I'll let you respond. What guidance can you give to people within the travel industry that have lost their jobs or looking to switch industries to rewrite their CVs to promote their transferable skills?
Well, two key points there already. So firstly, transferable skills. that, I mean, as Claire already mentioned, that's super important. So don't try to put your eggs into one basket and pursue just one strategy, as in what have you done in the past and what can you do there for the future. But try to identify what are transferable skill sets, both professionally but also from a personal competency point of view, that you're good at. And that may include, for example, change management, which I think is key right now, or innovation, process management, things like that. So that's important to highlight, which brings me to the second point, which is you're going to have to know, on the one hand side, let's call it the gatekeeper. So who's going to be reading your resume first? And if you're pursuing the traditional strategies, then typically that lands with HR. HR is going to see a lot of resumes right now, so it's important to be able to stand out very quickly. But also try to network and try to, I don't want to say circumnavigate the HR department, but sometimes it's really helpful to have direct access to the department heads that you're interested in joining, because they're going to look at potentially resumes in a slightly different aspect. They may still then forward the resume internally to their in-house HR department, but you've been able to then better gain access to the decision makers. I could go on, but does that already help answer the question?
I think you've addressed it very, very well. So I'm going to move on to our next topic now, and I'm going to again start with Claire. You are a sales and marketing professional, but do you believe that this focus on culling sales and marketing jobs is short-sighted?
I think in the longer term or medium term, as the business comes back, then yes, the answer can only be yes to that, because as the business comes back, the sales and the marketing professionals as well are going to need to be there to go out and push the company for who they're working for, and bring that business back on board and back online in the new norm. But it's a difficult one, isn't it, for companies to tie up against the business and where they are and their ability to keep trading, and having their cost base in the right position to enable them to still be there as they come out of the back end of COVID.
Dave, I mean, there's a lot of us on this call, yourself and myself included. We're marketeers and sales and marketeers. What's your take on this, please?
I totally. I mean, people are in an incredibly difficult situation. Employers are in an incredibly difficult situation. To me, it's staggering that you get rid of your main salespeople, and they're not just salespeople; they're relationships people. And these people have worked years and years and years to develop the relationships with the customers and with the clients. And when things do turn around and the customers want to start getting contact, they want to start with the relationship they had. They've now got to start working on a completely new relationship with a new person. And let's be honest, Mark, this industry, we are extremely close. We do know each other's partners and families, and we know that, that's how this industry works. And for people who've been working for so long in particular companies, who have developed these relationships with their customers, the customer's now going to start a completely new process with a completely new contact at the company. I get it that, with the salaries and how things have to be looked at, but I do find it amazing when you sometimes, the main person, the people in the industry that everybody knows is the person who loses their role, and these persons have the relationships in place which have now got to start all over again.
And Thomas, in the organisations that you're working with, are you seeing any evidence of those organisations being innovative, perhaps adopting new school thinking around sales tactics? What are you seeing there?
I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag. But I mean, let me firstly start with, yes, completely concur with what's been said. I think it's actually very short-sighted right now to get rid of your sales and marketing staff, because a lot of the clients that we're dealing with, they basically talk first and foremost about the importance of repositioning right now, potentially call it rebranding and gaining access to a new target audience. So those are all commercial aspects that need to be taken care of. At the same time, I don't think it's just purely limited to, let's say, the sales and marketing department per se. A lot of the clients also sort of reevaluate the way they basically sell and distribute their products and services. So we're talking now about, beyond sales and marketing functions, but actually going into e-commerce and even technology. And even here, unfortunately, sort of we see a split between companies who try to innovate, try to be pursuing strategies with part-time work, but retaining some of their staff, and others just getting rid of, let's say, 30% of the workforce across the entire organization, which I think is flawed. So I think it's going to be important, if you want to try to innovate, to stay agile, to keep the knowledge in-house that you have. Dave, you mentioned the relationships, which is very key right now in this difficult time. So yes, unfortunately, I think certain strategies that some of the companies are pursuing are flawed, but they're trying to innovate by at least trying to adapt, saying, look, rather than making someone redundant, can we provide perhaps a part-time role for function X, Y, or Z?
Okay, so I've got a question for you, Thomas, but before I do that, there's a comment come through from Ellen Nessick. Hi, Eleanor. And Eleanor's comment, which is directed to us all, is, we recently hired someone, received 450 applications. He had generic CV. It's so important to highlight all these transferable skills, and the people who got through to interview were the ones that did this well. Coupled with a question from Roger Peters for you, Thomas, and I'll then ask you to comment on both of those. Second from Roger. Thomas, should you rewrite your CV to suit the job advert, or should you just have one for continuity? So 2 for you, sir.
No, very, very plain no. You always should make sure that the resume reflects the position that you're applying for and the company. I think that's a huge mistake just to have one resume, because the fact is, if you're applying for company X, which may look for position Y, that company will be in a different situation right now, and therefore may have different needs and requirements than a different company that you may be applying for. So what you want to make sure is that you highlight towards company A, B, or C how specifically you and your background can add value to their organization, and you can't do that with a generic resume. So that's a very plain and simple answer.
And any comments there from Claire or Dave on the 2 points that have just been raised?
I think the other thing to bear in mind is not solely to rely on your CV or your resume. A cover letter is also really important, and I think that's where additionally you can sell the value to the company specifically, and what you're actually going to deliver the value to them, and why you want to work for them.
Okay. So Dave, I'm going to come on to you now with a slightly different topic, and I'll then come back to our other 2 panelists for their views on this. So what do you think the impact of shrinking workforces is going to be ultimately for the customer? What is the customer going to see or not see as a direct result of this contraction?
I think at the moment they're already seeing it, Mark, with the furlough scheme. A lot of people that we talk to are saying, well, actually, I don't know who I'm talking to at my company, because obviously various account managers and sales managers are on furlough. And when the corporates are trying to get hold of somebody to talk to them, they're not able to sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes that happens. But I get back to my earlier point. It's about it's starting over again. It's starting the relationship again. It's the whole thing is that if you've dealt with somebody for 20 years, and I know people who've worked in the industry for 40 years who've lost their roles. If you work with that person closely and they're no longer around, it's starting the whole process again. And the other thing with the smaller work staff is you're stretching, let's be honest, and very soon I hope we can all get out and be face-to-face meetings and buy each other a beer in a bar. If your workforce is halved, you haven't got the capacity to go out and do all the meetings you need to do. And I think when we come through this, that's going to be even more important, because people are going to be reviewing everything. We're looking at who they're working with, why they're working with, and how they're doing it. And I remember many years ago when we had the previous crisis, back in the economic crisis, and dear old Flybe, they had an advert saying, if you're not seeing your customer, who is? And this is going to be the problem. If you don't have the workforce to go and see those customers, somebody else will, and that's what you've got to be prepared for.
How do you see the general contraction impacting your ex-customers?
Well, I think it comes down to what Dave said, is as the business starts to come back, I think at this moment in time, the contact from is a very different contact at this moment in time for the customer as well as the supplier. But as things start to improve, and positively they will, it's just when, but they will. But as that starts to happen and people need that backup support, if that's not there, then that's where the customer will start to consider what their options are.
So Thomas, from a company point of view, obviously we hear lots about term buzzwords, reskilling, productivity. What are you seeing there? And then what's your take on the impact on customers?
Yeah, look, I think it's a slippery slope if you are not looking after your customers from a quality point of view or continuity of service, right? Because that's your main source of income, or your only source of income, let's put it that way. So companies need to really make sure that they can deliver on those aspects. And they can do that by focusing from an organizational point of view on really, as you've said it actually, on reskilling the workforce, but also in transferring the institutional knowledge. So when you face a situation where you have to, cut costs and you have to make people redundant, again, don't apply a blanket approach, but identify, first of all, who are the individuals who hold the institutional knowledge that is critical for us at this moment in time? Who are the individuals that hold key relationships? And who are the individuals who essentially also possess transferable skill sets that can help us successfully execute potentially a new strategy? So you're going to have to start with that and then implement it. So you're going to want to make sure that essentially the HR strategy is aligned with the business strategy, and most likely the business strategy will have changed by now. So that's key. And I'd say most of the clients that we're working with right now are therefore focusing on reskilling and on transferring institutional knowledge. That's very important.
And what are you hearing from the organisations you're working with around redundancy policy? I think you have a view of that.
In regards to redundancy policy?
Yeah, and specifically I'm looking at whether redundancy policy should be based on last in, first out, what it should be based on.
No. Yeah, again, I mean, you do see a mixed bag, right? So some companies that are perhaps less sophisticated do adopt that approach to say, look, who's came in last and therefore that person is first out. I think that's a flawed strategy. Again, what they're going to have to make sure is if they have to cut their workforce, strategically evaluate your in-house talent pool. Problem here is, and that's a lengthy conversation, but a lot of the times the organizations actually don't really have a good overview of their in-house talent pool. A lot of the times that knowledge rests with either regional leaders or department head leaders, not necessarily with HR centrally, which one assumes should be the case. Ideally it is, but a lot of the time it isn't, which puts HR in a difficult spot, because then HR needs to help leaders to, again, cut costs, but they don't know which talent they need to retain and what the qualities are of that talent. So that's a really difficult process. So ideally, they should be in a position to be able to say, look, we're looking going forward at XYZ transferable skill sets. The importance rests on, for example, innovation or change management or digitalization. And therefore, based on these criteria, who really has objectively the right skill sets and the right personal attributes to be able to execute against that strategy. And by default, it's not going to be, oh, the person who came last in should be the person who's first out, because that person may actually have the most relevant skill sets.
I've got 2 or 3 questions from our attendees to ask the panel for their views on. And the first one is from Jo Layton. Good morning, Jo. And her question is this: what does the panel think we need to do as individuals to support our colleagues and friends? Jo says that grief counselling is going to be key. Is there a travel charity where we can donate that can provide coaching and support to get through the grief and self-confidence issues that will be affecting our friends going through this? Dave, do you want to start with that? Then I'll come then to Claire and to Thomas. Dave.
I'm not aware of any charity, and it's probably a good idea, but I think a couple of the leisure guys have done something to create something, but definitely not the corporate sector. I think that the whole idea is that we need to be there for everybody. I mean, when we started doing the members of
think we
staff
lost
who have been. I'm still here. I'm chatting. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go on, please carry on, Dave.
Sorry. When we launched BTA Cares, we heard that a lot of people weren't getting the message about what we were doing, so they weren't hearing about what was happening, which is a bit frustrating. But I think the whole idea is creating it. I've got more WhatsApp groups at the moment than I care to imagine, talking to various people and trying to help and offer advice. And I think that is the thing. It's trying to keep the contact, trying to keep the interaction with people. And but Joe, it's a good idea. It's saying, but you know, it's another thing for somebody else to do. And I think, you know, it's a great idea. We've got a few ideas we're working with at the BTA, which we're looking at as well, which hopefully come out. And for example, yesterday we partnered with TravelLearns. We've launched a transferable skills course, which has been very kindly co-sponsored by Clare's ex-employers at AETHOS, and so there's ways of people going on and doing that course as well, which is on the BTA Cares website. I'm sorry, Mark, I shouldn't be doing advertising, but there's stuff out there for people, but we'll do as much as we can.
Before I come to you, Claire, I've got a comment in here from Chris Crowley, and I'd like you to comment on this as well as addressing the question previously. And Chris's comment is this: keeping an active network is really key. It keeps your mind active, keeps you in tune with what's happening. It's a chance to educate yourself in new skills and working practices, and keeps you close to opportunities as they come up. So is that your experience, and have you come across any charities on the lines that Joe has mentioned?
I haven't come across any charities, but certainly from a networking perspective, I do use and I do connect with the various webinars that are put forward on LinkedIn. There's a couple of specific groups, and obviously, as I say, with the BTA Cares, and one of the big things around that is during the sessions is the ability to connect with other people and grow your network. And then you actually start to see opportunities that they're advertising, that they've got from their own network, which you may not have considered, because, you know, with all due respect, most of my network on LinkedIn was around the travel industry or the corporate travel industry in terms of my customers. So it wouldn't have been the IT person within one of my customers, it was the fleet or the travel manager. So it's very travel related, and that has changed quite dramatically over the last 3 to 4 months. Slight challenge with that is when you do reach out to somebody, because if you look at the company, you can see on there the people that work for the company and who your connections are. And then it's quite surprising how we're not really connected to some of our connections on LinkedIn. So, you know, you try and use those, as Thomas said earlier, use your connections and use a way into the company. That can be a bit of a challenge, but if people do know, they absolutely do reach out for you and support you and do their best to help you. So absolutely, I think these webinars that are giving you the advice, I pick up something new each time I go on them. Even though I've done a few CV courses, there will always be something else that you pick up on to change your CV.
Just on that particular point, a note from Mike Stapley. Hi, Mike. And Mike says Hugs UK is one support network which he sees a lot of on LinkedIn. So I don't know whether you're familiar with that, and please check that one out. So Thomas, coming to you now, is there more that companies that are making redundancies could and should be doing to support their employees?
Yes, I mean, it goes a little bit back to what I've mentioned earlier, right? So the ongoing support is critical, which means that it should touch base on providing access to a network, providing access to potentially training programs so that you can, you know, further advance your skills or learn new skills. It should be around more a personal point of view, mental wealth, mental well-being. But I think it's also, perhaps just slightly picking up on the earlier audience question, which I think was a good one. Individuals who are currently looking for a job need to be aware that, for example, you know, headhunters like myself, you know, we work only on a certain percentage of the available opportunities in the market. But that's not to say that we can't add value to the individual in question. So I would always encourage to engage, reach out, and just ask for advice, or say, look, what are you hearing in the market, Thomas? Which sectors are active right now? Do you know of companies who are actively hiring? I may not be assisting these companies, but certainly I'm happy to help if I can say, hey, you know, I've heard of company XYZ looking for specifically, let's say, sales individuals or technology experts, things like that. So I think that's critical.
And just following up on Mike Stapley's point about Hugs, a note from Juliet Howie. Hugs UK offers free support and mentoring, help with CV, interview preparation, etc. So let's move the conversation on now. And let's ask the question of how employers are actually going to fill and plug the knowledge gaps that are going to arise as a result of this. Thomas, I'm going to start with you, please.
Yeah, again, I think I see two sort of strategies being pursued. One is a strategy which essentially just focuses on throwing more at the staff that is left. And that typically doesn't work out very well because it just elevates the stress level. And a lot of the times individuals may not necessarily be able to pick up the additional responsibilities that they have to. The second strategy is focused a lot more on really trying to be innovative and strategic. And most of the times I'd argue that strategy is based on either reskilling, which again ties back to what I've said earlier. In order to reskill, you need to have a good overview of the in-house talent pool that you have, which most of the companies don't, so they're going to have to work on that. But secondly, and that perhaps is more important, companies should focus on contextual performance. So again, contextual performance essentially means that you're trying to focus on individuals who, based on their abilities, are good not necessarily at a specific skill, which everyone can learn, but actually at, for example, as I've mentioned, I think in the first question, so change management or driving innovation, process management, you know, engaging teams, rallying teams behind a certain vision and mission. And I think that's going to be critical. So in order to fill those gaps, try to identify the individuals who will be able to manage a motivated team to then pursue those strategies. And then as I said, reskilling and training, cross promotions. But it's also, I think, in a way, a little bit an exciting time for the young up-and-coming talent, because some companies are really using that as an opportunity to let them prove themselves. And I think some companies have been very positively surprised that some of these, you know, call them young guns, have been able to pick up pace very quickly.
Dave, what's your take on that, what Thomas has just said?
I would totally agree, and I would think that the thing that as a company, you need to start now. You know, let's not think, you know, Boris says, oh, maybe for another 6 months we won't be able to do this and that. Well, you know, you need to start planning now and getting things in place. This is a time when people are, with respect, having a bit more time on their hands. If they're furloughed, they can still train, they can do other stuff. So I think it's important, if you are going to start looking at different avenues, you need to start now and start doing the training now. I'm not an employee or a training expert, but that's what I would suggest.
So Claire, what are you actually doing to fill your time now, and how are you going about looking for whatever the future holds for you? You've gone mute, Claire.
Oh. So yes, it's all about looking at, you know, getting the job adverts coming, or the messages coming in terms of what I'm looking for. So I have LinkedIn, Indeed, Reed, these companies where I've put in what my skill set is or the types of jobs and where I'm looking. So they come in on a daily basis. And then it's highlighting those that I believe I'm interested in, but also that I can do the skills that they're looking for. And on that base, you know, on that point, I would say focus on what you can do, and there are things on that list that perhaps you can't, but don't write the opportunity off. It does come back to that transferable skill, and it's taken me a long time to get to that position in terms of being able to see through those job adverts in terms of what it is that I need to or that I've got that I can offer to that company. So it really is, a lot of time is taken up applying for jobs, but also enjoying and being involved in some of the webinars that are out there, and taking time out every so often. That is really important. You get a lot of knockbacks, I'm not going to lie, and you have to take that time. You will have down days. You'll have very bad down days. And just take yourself away, go for a walk, have that time to continue that grieving process that is still there. And so that you can actually then come back to your desk in a much more positive frame of mind to take on the next day, as it were.
I'm going to come to Dave now, because the point that came out of what Thomas was saying. So there is actually a new generation coming through. Are the opportunities there for the younger people coming through? And how do you see that changing the marketplace, Dave?
I think it's every opportunity, and I think this digital natives and things like that. These are the guys who are coming through and saying, "This is the new tool. This is what we can do." And I think at the moment, where we are practically resetting the button for business travel, we're actually pressing the reset. So hold on a minute, right? Let's pause. Let's reset. So for the younger people coming through and the new entrepreneurs, I think there's a massive opportunity. And I know Joe Layton alluded to it in your session previously, but if I was a startup, if I'd been maybe redundant, but I had a particular idea of something that I'd be keen to do, I think now is the time to do that. And I think that for young entrepreneurs in particular, this is a great opportunity, because at the moment people are sitting there, they've pressed the reset button, and it's now time looking at actually what else can we do and how can we make this industry great.
Okay, I've got a question for Thomas here from Karen McKenna. Hi, Karen. And the question, Thomas, is this. Do you think there will be a bigger demand for temporary or contract work in business travel next year? With that in mind, should individuals be considering this in the short term, as there will be a huge skills gap when travel comes back?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. So, okay, let me try to tackle it. So firstly, yes, to some extent, I do think organizations are trying to fill the knowledge gap by basically employing temporary workers to some extent, because it's going to be cheaper. Would I recommend taking that on? I think it's a very personal choice. To some extent, it will depend on the circumstances, including also financial ones. But it's certainly not harmful, and I think it could be potentially an interesting way to get to know a different company and/or to get to know a different sector, and/or to potentially also apply your skill set in a slightly different environment or context. So overall, I think it's a productive way to potentially get back into full-time employment.
Is that something you've looked at, Claire?
I've mainly been looking at full-time opportunities, but I wouldn't rule anything out. And I've been looking through charity work as well as going in, and yes, there have been a couple of fixed-term contracts in that arena. So I certainly wouldn't rule it out.
Okay. So Dave, moving on now, and obviously you mentioned there in terms of opportunities for young entrepreneurial people, but do you see as a result of this, as we have people looking for new opportunities, do you see there being more startups, more consultants, and then if that is the case, is there room for everyone?
It's like anything. If there's room, if you're good enough, if you've got the skills, or you've got the product that people like, then there's always room for you. So I definitely think that there is room, but you've got to get the right product. I mean, we've been talking to a few new startups with some new, really exciting tools, which we'll be promoting over the coming months. And this is the time to do it. So I would say that, yes, there is room if you have the right product and you have the right offering. Don't do things for the sake of it. When I started last year, I realized what I could do and how I can make it work. If I'd done it this year, I'd probably be in a bit of a mess, to be honest, and I was fortunate. But, you've got to make sure you have the right product and the right offering to do it. Don't just do something you think, well, this is what I want to do. You've got to do your research and make sure that what you bring in, there will be demand for, because otherwise, you'll waste your time.
Thomas?
Completely agree. I think there's definitely room for it, as long as you provide quality and a unique value proposition, because otherwise you just get lost amongst the crowd, if you'd like. And ultimately, I think in the mid to long term, that could harm you. So the focus needs to be on really providing quality and added value. As it relates to startups, again, I concur with Dave. So we've started to work a lot more with startups, and I think it's actually very exciting times for a lot of them. Not only because, again, out of disruption, there always comes innovation and opportunity, but it's also a great time for these organizations to tap into a much larger available talent pool. Individuals to some extent that perhaps in the past wouldn't have considered joining a startup, but now, they're reevaluating basically all the decisions. They may have a different risk appetite. And if you have the opportunity to assume a slightly larger risk by joining a startup, I think the potential reward can also be very beneficial. So I think if you do your due diligence, either to set up your own startup or to join one, it can be a very, very beneficial choice in the mid to long term.
Claire, is that something you would consider?
I have considered joining some startups, but not actually setting myself up from that perspective. That's not something that excites me, but in terms of joining startups, absolutely. There's a lot of disruptors out there that are coming in different angles to the market, in different industries, so absolutely.
What I may add perhaps just to that is, if you are considering to join a startup, certainly, make sure to do your due diligence, ask the right questions, not only as it relates to the business strategy, but also, how involved are the founders? Where's the money coming from? Are the founders and the money side of things, are they aligned in terms of growth strategies? Because that sometimes can be a really big hurdle to overcome. So, yeah, be cautious.
I think the other thing as well that I've had a couple of insights to are not so much the startups, but the companies that try and get you on board to sell the products. It used to be called pyramid selling, but there's been a few of those out there as well that have contacted on the back of that all sound great. So yeah, I think that's another area to be cautious of, and know that again, your due diligence on something like that.
So Dave, where do you see, as someone who's been within this industry for a number of years, where do you see the opportunities?
Well, that's a tricky one, Mark, because I would never class myself as a business travel expert, and I've never professed to be in that.
Neither would anybody else, but carry on anyway.
Yeah, thanks. I'll throw it in. You can slap it back. That's fine. Thank you. I think you've just got to think, actually, and what I've always tried to do when I do anything is actually put myself in the customer's shoes. What do I want? What would I be looking to do? What would I be willing to pay? What is it that I think I need? I'm a networking person. I want to get out and arrange events and at the moment I can't, but that's what I want to do. And I wouldn't profess to try and do anything else that I didn't know anything about. But I think you've got to put yourself in the customers. What do they want? What are they looking for? What would they be prepared to pay? And then look at it. But I wouldn't like to comment on what I think is out there, because I really don't have the expertise.
Okay. Claire, is there anything that you have a particular view on where the opportunities might lie?
I mean, there are opportunities out there, and I've certainly seen more opportunity come about starting into September. Unfortunately, they're not within the travel sector at the moment, although I am seeing a few starting to come up there as well. But the sectors really are around sort of your finance and banking, technology, so SaaS, so software as a service, data. Those really are the key areas that I'm seeing where there are a lot of opportunities. So, and there are, and I think it comes back to what I said before. It's about looking really at what you can do and not what you can't, and don't discount something because you think there's something on there. Well, I can't do that, but it's really important that you have a look, and everything's asking for a degree, everything's asking for this experience and that experience, and you don't have to follow that 100%. They know they're not going to get a candidate that has all of that available to them, and we have such fantastic skills in our industry, and we're all fantastic people, relationship people. We have large customers, we have the digital experiences with the technology that we use for making bookings, and all of that really good stuff. So it really is broadening your horizon as to what you have today, and really put yourself out there for those roles and the things that you can do.
Yes, I know it's difficult to generalise, but what is your take on where the opportunities are?
Yeah, so if I may just briefly pick up also on what Claire has just said, which I think is very relevant and important to stress. You're going to have to be confident, and if you don't tick 100% of the boxes, don't worry about it. If you are convinced that you can, thrive in that position, put yourself forward. The number of times that we've worked with clients who've said, look, our wish list is X, and then we came back and presented a shortlist, and we always throw in 2 or 3 out-of-the-box individuals who may not tick all of the boxes, but we're convinced they can add value. And a lot of the times, actually, the clients go for these out-of-the-box candidates. So I think that's something to bear in mind. Don't be discouraged if you don't tick all of the boxes. Be confident. As it relates to opportunities, yes, I agree with Dave. It's a bit difficult to generalize, but overall, I'd say, look, focus on, as we said before, transferable skill sets, but also what are you passionate about? What do you want to do, right? Because there's no point in taking something on, let's say, in the banking industry or in pharmaceuticals, if you just don't feel passionate about their product. That's not going to be, something in the long term that's going to be successful. Having said that, don't be too critical in choosing that next step. What I think is important, or what should be the way to evaluate an opportunity is it helping you to move in the right direction? What can you do as a next step thereafter? And sometimes it's worthwhile to do that sacrifice in the interim step. Opportunities, I'd argue, certainly IT technology. So we're working with a number of companies who are really, I'd call it more of a distribution or product platform, and they're keen to secure individuals from a sales and account management background, for example, or a business development background to add to their team, which helps them to gain access to new customers, but also to potentially improve their product, because a lot of the times these individuals who come out of the travel sector will have used the product in the first place. Secondly, weirdly enough, a little bit co-working. I would have thought the sector is severely impacted, but a lot of the co-working companies are now focusing on shifting their focus from the individuals, like WeWork, for example, to the bigger corporate clients. So again, actually, these type of organizations need sales, business development individuals, account managers. And lastly, in the sort of hotel alternative space. So for example, extended stay. Again, those type of organizations have to some large extent corporate clients. And I'd argue if you're in the corporate travel world, huge overlap in terms of skill sets. That's just a couple of examples.
Thank you, Thomas. We're nearly out of time, and I've got one last question. I'd like from each of our panelists, please, one piece of advice you would give to anyone who now finds themselves redundant. And I'm going to start with Dave, then to Thomas, and finish with Claire. Dave first, please.
I would say don't be ashamed, don't be embarrassed, and talk to as many people as you can, engage as much as you can. But I think that the thing to understand is it's nothing to be ashamed of.
Thomas.
I think build and surround yourself with a personal board of advisors, between 5 to 7 people who can really share with you different viewpoints from a personal professional point of view to help you make better judgments and better decisions. Be humble, adaptable, have the long term in mind, and take time to digest. Claire, you said it. It's a difficult time, so make sure that you reevaluate your criteria, your risk appetite, to then make the right decisions.
And Claire.
I think I've covered most of it, but a couple of things is it's not you, it's your role. And remember that. It's really, really important. And secondly, reach out to people. You're not in this alone. Reach out to people. As Dave said, don't be ashamed, and ask for support. It's there and everybody is willing to help you.
Well, time to share with you the result of the poll. We actually asked at the start of this session, 79% of you said that you were concerned for your future. So hopefully this session will have been of use to you. I'd just like to thank 3 superb panelists. I'd like to thank Claire. I'd like to thank Dave and Thomas. I hope you've enjoyed our webinar series. This is the 5th. It's the last in the first series, but we'll be back at the end of October. Thank you to all of you for your time. I hope you found it beneficial. Just before we go, 1 or 2 commercial messages. A reminder in and around the Urban Living Festival, 25th to the 26th of November, tobacco doc, government permitting. We have a superb lineup of sponsors that are all listed on your slide, and also a number of excellent media partners. If any of you is interested in taking up any of the remaining sponsorship opportunities, the gorgeous Katie is the one to speak to. All that remains for me is to thank you for your attention. Remember that content marketing is something that you should never cut during a crisis. And if we at TIN can help you with your content, you know where to find us. Thanks for your time, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody. Take care.